was around Christmas time, so we weren't doing the book of Acts then, but now we are. And as I said, we're getting towards the end of it. And it's been like an exciting journey. I feel in many ways like we've been on this journey that, as we followed Paul from the very beginning of his conversion, and then, his calling and all the ways that God used him. Very, very, very exciting life, as God chose him to play a key role in the building of the church and the establishing of the church in this world. So we'll try to tie things together a little bit as we start, and just remember where we were in the story. I know it's been a while since we've been in the book of Acts. But if you'll recall, Paul had 3 missionary journeys, and at the end of the last one, as he kept going farther and farther towards Macedonia and Greece and the big cities, and as he was returning, he returned with this vision that someday he would end up in Rome, which took a lot of faith, because basically Rome was west and he was going east back towards Jerusalem. But he still had this in the back of his mind, that vision that he would end up in Rome. So he gets arrested, if you remember. There were these people that were, chasing Paul all over the place, and they didn't really want him to succeed in any way, and they would have been happy if he was dead. In fact, they did try to kill him. He ends up being arrested, and it was more a matter of keeping the peace, I think, from the Roman standpoint. They took him out of Jerusalem to a place of safety in Caesarea. He stayed there under the governorship of Felix, and kind of enjoyed a little bit of a respite while he was in prison. It wasn't, a terrible situation. Felix had sort of kept him there, hoping that he would pay him a bribe, if you remember, but he never did. Well, Felix gets replaced by Festus. So Festus comes in, and he's got to kind of, you're a new administration. You have to try to figure out all the details of what's going on in this little Judean town that you're now in charge of. I should say I guess it's a province or the area of Judea. And he was appointed the new governor. He was actually a pretty fair-minded man. He's a pretty wise man, if we remember. And Paul is once again, he's got this guy in prison, and he knows he can't just leave him there. And he knows that this is important because there's so many people that knew about Paul. Paul had such an influence in the whole Roman Empire by this time. He knew, in a sense, that this was like, handling a hot potato, and he knew he had to do something. So they kind of opened up the case again, and Paul was brought before Festus and Agrippa, who was, at that time, I guess you could say, the puppet king of Israel. And it had been such a long time since people had accused him. They couldn't really find anybody that could bring a strong case against Paul. And they came to the conclusion that, there's nothing that we can hold him for, but there was just one little technicality, and that was that Paul had appealed to Caesar. Now, this is where God's providence comes in, because remember, Paul had this notion that he would end up in Rome at some point. And at one point, along the way, he's like worried that he's not going to see the next day because everybody's trying to kill him. You have what you might call a miraculous intervention by Rome. They take Paul and they hustle him off under a guard of 200 soldiers to Caesarea. And Paul kind of veges out there for about 2 years until we come to this point now where Festus is judging him. He appeals to Caesar, so now all expense paid trip to Rome. He didn't even have to pay the fare. I mean, isn't this God's sovereignty? He's heading east, and now he's heading in the direction that he feels God wants him to be in. So we read this in Acts 26, 30 to 32. It says, the king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice, those sitting with them, and after they left the room, they began to say one another, this man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment. This is Acts 26, just before 27. In verse 32, Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. So Paul's appeal to Caesar, as I said, buys him this all-expense-paid trip to Rome. And the interesting thing is when Paul gets on this boat and as he begins this journey, he's not, and we said this about him before, he was still looking for opportunities to be a witness. He was still looking for open doors, as we, mentioned, I think, the last time. And the fact that he was in chains, the fact that he was a prisoner now, did not deter him one bit from his calling. And he just, if my only audience is this Roman soldier that's chained to me, then I'm going to witness to him. That's a really great example to us. So now they're about to begin their journey, and this is what the chapter 27 is all about. It gives us an account of this journey. And what we're going to do is we're going to read through that verse by verse, and then I'll stop every once in a while to, try to think about where we are in this journey. So we begin in Acts 27, verse 1. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, the Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. Okay, time out. So we've got a number of people that are mentioned here. One of them is we. The first name, that's not his name, but who is that? Well, it's Luke, because he's the one who's writing this book. So we know Luke is on board. We know that the next guy that's mentioned is Julius, and Julius would be the centurion that was appointed to guard Paul and make sure that he gets to Rome. I mean, this is important. Paul is an important prisoner, so they didn't want to mess it up. And I don't know how many people that he's a centurion, so he would have had 100, men underneath him. I don't know if they needed 100, to go along on the ship, but there was a contingency of the Roman government on there. And another guy that's mentioned is Aristarchus. He's interesting. We met him when Paul was returning from Macedonia on his last missionary journey, and it simply says that Aristarchus had joined him. And Paul mentions his name specifically in, I think it's Galatians, who he said, my fellow prisoner, Aristarchus. So we've got these names. Of course, you have 278 people on this boat. There were also other prisoners. There